Okay, perfect. So while others join, I think it makes sense to maybe start with introductions from the host so you guys get to know us. I'll get started here on my side. But we also have Anna McGovern and Dave Chrysler. Randy Breesath will also join us in a few minutes. But in the meantime, we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves. So my name's Diego Montes. I'm originally from Nicaragua. I studied in the University of Virginia Finance and Management, and then I worked in PwC supply chain for 8 years in New York. Um, that's where I sort of got my expertise around inventory management, planning, logistics, etc. So now I'll pass it on to Anna.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good evening, wherever you're dialing in from. It's so nice to see so many wonderful and familiar names on the screen. My name is Anna McGovern. I'm the managing director of Pondview Consulting. It's my own consulting firm in supply chain and procurement. I spent 23 years of my career working for Unilever in end-to-end supply chain and in procurement, and then I followed that by working in the beauty industry for Arcade Beauty, where I was the CPO and chief supply chain officer for a manufacturer in luxury sampling solutions. Then I went on to become the chief supply chain officer for the Food Bank for New York City in the heart of the pandemic. And now I get to take everything I've learned over a 35-year supply chain career and hopefully advise my clients on how to get the most out of their supply chain and supplier relationships. Thank you so much for being here. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dave Chrysler.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Diego. Hello, everybody. For those that don't know, my name is Dave Chrysler. I also own an independent consulting business. We focus mostly on operations, so internal supply chain from my perspective, working with leaders to help them solve challenges around productivity, generally inventory and product quality as well. So I come to you with more than 25 years experience, having held various operational leadership roles for a large publicly traded company that grew through acquisition, and excited to be here with you all today. So looking forward to a great conversation.
Perfect. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Anna. So like I said, we're waiting for another host, Randy, who's going to join. His background is more around procurement. And the idea of today's call is to talk about a very, important topic that has hit the supply chain books recently, which is how to use the supply chain to alleviate some of the cash that's available in our companies to be able to, use that cash better for, other purposes. As you know, interest rates are higher than they've, been in the recent history, and the cost of capital is more important and more meaningful nowadays. So it's a constant question that CFOs and chief supply chain officers are having nowadays. And the purpose of this call is that we brought in three experts from different areas. Anna is going to be focused more on inventory management, materials management perspective. Dave's going to be focused more on the manufacturing perspective. And then Randy's going to be talking more about procurement and strategic sourcing and how that can help alleviate cash as well. I will be your host for today. I'll be guiding the conversation. I have as well a data analytics and supply chain background, so I might be chiming in with some comments. Something important for today, if you have questions, like we want this to be as collaborative as possible, so please post them in the chat. I'll be reading through those and making sure that our panel is answering those questions actively. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Anna for some opening remarks, and then we'll, merge more towards the panel format. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Diego, and thank you all. So, the inspiration for this conversation took place back in late January when Diego and I were in Miami attending a trade show called Cosmoprof. And I met with one of my former colleagues from Unilever, who is in charge of third-party manufacturing, right? So for nutrition and for beauty within his company. And he was lamenting to me that he's no longer just tasked with delivering cost savings. He said, Anna, I now have cash savings targets on top of cost savings targets. And he said, but you know what? He goes, there are so many people out there that don't make that connection. If you're in procurement, you're simply not trained to think about the end-to-end supply chain, right? You're there and you're thinking about how do I save, how do I save money on materials or services that I buy from my suppliers? You're not thinking, there's an opportunity for me to potentially pay more from an alternate supplier, but that alternate supplier may be able to drive a better way of working or may drive higher inventory turns that will cause me to liberate a lot more cash. And so therefore it's a win-win in terms of the business. So that's the inspiration for this. Just recently, I attended an Ardent Partners conference, and what is keeping up CPOs at night and what's keeping up CFOs at night? So what's happening is that the CFOs are demanding from procurement, they're demanding a lot more cost savings and they're demanding a lot more cash savings. In other words, how do we reduce inventory? How do we pass on inventory carrying costs throughout the chain as opposed to carrying it ourselves? And that's because, as Diego already mentioned, it's the cost of capital that's driving this. It's the cost of borrowing. And in some cases, if sales and marketing can't grow the top line, we need to find the EBITDA somewhere. So we're going to now open it up for the questions. And, we invite you to type in your discussions and your questions into the chat. And we will leave time at the end, to answer a lot of those questions and invite you to comment at the end. So over to you, Diego. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Sam, for that introduction. So today we're going to talk about first some of the problems that these companies are facing, get some context there and get their perspective around what's driving some of these questions to alleviate cash. Then we're going to have some poll questions. So be ready to, give your perspective. We're going to share your perspective with the others in the call to see where everyone's sort of lying with these issues. And then we're going to talk about, based on your questions, how can we start alleviating some of the problems that we saw from those polls? And then any tools and technologies, any other levers and solutions that our panel can offer us, we'll be talking about for sure. And then last, just understanding if there are questions from your side and any other questions that you would like to get answered. So to kick things off, Dave, I'll kick it off with you. One of the things we want to talk about today is how are supply chains critical in the cash management cycle, and what problems are your clients facing today that may inhibit them from unlocking their cash? So if we could maybe start talking a little more about the problem statement and what we're trying to solve and what companies are trying to solve, that would be great to frame the conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Diego. I think from my perspective in the things that I'm seeing, both historically and today, kind of to Anna's point, a lot of the challenges center around the kind of disparate systems, the siloed nature between finance and operations, how those things are coming together to ultimately impact things like cash flow and profitability. I think it's a challenge generally faced by most organizations, and the larger the organization, the more complex that it becomes. And again, I go back to the disparate systems that are really the key drivers behind that. So when we're talking about doing things like, S&OP planning and, inventory management activities, and having all of the different pieces of the organization, on the same page in terms of what that means and what the drivers are ultimately for the business. I think that's from a high level, that's obviously the most critical piece of this, is bringing those things together in a meaningful way. And that's, to me, the biggest challenge that I see, in the organizations I'm interfacing with.
Perfect. Anna, do you want to maybe add some more to that?
Yeah, I
Any
mean,
more?
essentially, there's, you know, it's a very simple process, right? There are two levers, to delivering profitability, right? You either raise prices or you lower cost, somewhere. So those are the only two choices we have. But and then in that process, where are you going to then free up the cash so that you're not tying up inventory or cash in long either payment cycles or inventory cycles? So you can either generate more inventory turns, you can ask your suppliers to extend payment terms, you can ask your customers to pay faster, and give them incentives to do that. There are pluses and minuses to some of these things. The most ideal scenario is that you've got an end-to-end collaborative cycle. So if you've got a mature integrated business planning cycle, or you've got a mature S&OP planning cycle, you're then tying up your plans down to the operational level and working through and including suppliers in that cycle, right? So there are arguments about forecast accuracy, forecast error. How do we get that right? So I'm going to tell you a little secret, and I'm probably going to get chewed out for this position. But I really don't give a rat's ass about forecast accuracy or forecast error, because guess what? I've been at this for 35 years. We haven't solved the issue. If you're serving an Amazon, you're not going to get that right. Maybe if you're serving a Boeing, we pretty much know that American Airlines wants 30 planes. So that's a little bit easier to forecast. But if you're selling cosmetics, okay, and it's a fickle business, you're not going to get the forecast right. Or if you're one of however many sellers on Amazon, you're not going to get the forecast right. So then what's the secret? Okay, how do you liberate cash from inventory? It's about having supply chain resilience and agility. And I know those terms get like batted around. The reality is you got to find the bottleneck, right? And that means taking that initial demand profile and breaking it down to where is the bottleneck and carrying a buffer around just the bottleneck, right? And then you make plans to be able to respond based on that bottleneck. So, if I've got, this cup and its various components, one of the components could be a 3-month lead time. Okay, but everything else is a 1-week lead time. So do I have to carry 3 months of inventory across the board, or do I just secure the one bottleneck? That's how you have demand-driven material planning, essentially, to help you reduce inventory, right? And then it's really about how do you segment customers? How do you segment suppliers? Not all customers are created equal. I hate to say that, but not all customers are created equal. Not all SKUs are created equal. You've got to have an A, B, and C classification for your customers and your inventory so that you're carrying the right things. I'll stop right there to see if there's additional comments from my colleagues, and to see what we're getting in the way of chat questions also.
Dave, yeah, I mean, if you want to, I mean, do you agree with that statement? Like, is that a strategy that you've used as well, where you're sort of trying to alleviate bottlenecks and hyper focusing on the bottlenecks instead of the whole forecast?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very tactical approach to dealing with it. Um, at a very detailed perspective. So the challenge that I see, back to my kind of opening statement of the separate systems, oftentimes we don't have that data. And if we do have that data, it's pretty ugly in terms of being able to aggregate and ultimately do something with it. So, solving for that challenge within the scope of what Anna just laid out is often what I see. So again, we talk about, how do we bring all of those conversations together? How do we do it in a meaningful way? We can obviously start with what we've got and take a look at it from that perspective, trying to map out those bigger pieces. And the reality is, I think just having different conversations internally and ideating around not just what we're working towards and why, from a, how do we get some additional cash flow movement here, but really, back to what Anna said, kind of looking at all of the different levers and buckets that we can pull to do that. And all of the final decision making is going to be based on what access, what data do we have access to, and how can we aggregate that to make better decisions. And that can be both internal and external, as it relates to the supply chain. So there's a great way to unpack it.
Good point. And one question we got from the chat is, we opened by saying it's something that's top of mind for executives right now, that they're taking care of the cash. But what happens in the case where, unlocking cash flow is maybe not the executive's priorities, or, it's not in their agenda, it's not maybe included in performance reviews at the end of the year, etc. And how have you seen your clients work around their different priorities, and how is cash playing as a priority in some of the different things that is at the C-suite level being explored?
Yeah, I can start with that. I agree with the comment. So we're describing this is what we need to do to achieve, the cash savings. However, employees are not incentivized the same way, right? So procurement is incentivized to deliver the cash savings. Somebody in supply chain or in production, somebody in manufacturing is incentivized to keep the lines running. Somebody in supply chain may want them to do various changeovers based on the demand. So there's only two KPIs that really matter, right? At the end of the day, any business needs to care about two things, and everybody needs to be aligned and laddered up to two things. One, are we growing market share? And two, what are our service levels delivering? Okay, so are we growing market share means that we're gaining the share of voice out there. Okay, we're competing and we're getting, market share increases because we're putting out a good product. Customer service levels means we're satisfying our customers by shipping on time and in full. And, what are those targets, right? So if I've got a target of, order fill, case fill, line fill, whatever it is, but the higher the target, the higher the investment in inventory to be able to respond, right? And so if I don't have all of my people, sales, marketing, finance, supply chain, procurement, R&D, if we're not all behind, we are here to grow market share, we are here to deliver service. If they're not all united behind how do we make that happen, then we're not going to be able to deliver what we're talking about. It'll be like everybody playing tug of war, but we're not all pulling in the same direction. So I'm not saying this stuff is easy, okay? Because if this stuff were easy, we wouldn't have to talk about this. All right, this stuff is really, really hard. And the thing that makes it super hard is that we just don't have the level of visibility, and we don't have the clean data or the ability to be able to look at these things, in a manageable way, in a quick way, right? We've got to do a lot of manipulation, a lot of cleaning. So if we had access to data at our fingertips to be able to make these decisions, life would be so much sweeter, right? So
Right. There's also one comment here that is very interesting, which is, I mean, this sounds great when you're in the position of power where you can, choose what's your, you know, I mean, what's your service level, etc. But what if you're a small player, right, and you don't have much flexing power, right? How do you combat against these larger players that are just going to expect the most service level from you, right? And how do you work with them to be able to understand that, there's different priorities that the firm has, and how do you get them to care about your situation, right? Because there's some risk involved, as one of the participants mentioned, that they don't really care about your cash situation. So they prioritize themselves. So how do you build those relationships with customers in this case to take this seriously?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one, Diego. I lovingly say I lived a life in the middle for for many years of my career, and this really kind of speaks to that for me. And living a life in the middle, whether we're talking about the kind of supplier relationship, big guy versus little guy, whether we're talking about some sort of an operational leadership where maybe you're reporting up to the C-suite and you're responsible for a lot of these activities on the ground floor, but you're, kind of taking direction from the top. It's obviously a huge challenge. The things that I would say, just based on experience, are we can only control the things that are within our control. And I think given the question from the kind of supplier standpoint, I don't disagree that they're not really going to care, but you can't run your business based on that, right? So you've got to find that meaningful kind of middle ground, if you will, to be able to survive and thrive as your own business. And to kind of tack on to what Anna was saying, like I say it slightly different. I don't disagree at all, but I say it slightly different. We're all here to figure out how to drive sustainable growth. We can't do that without obviously increasing market share without delivering. But what are the other drivers behind that, right? Profitability and cash flow. And so at the end of the day, if we can't meet that conversation in the middle with people that are kind of holding our feet to the fire, we're not going to have a business to worry about. So, it's very much like, when I was leading teams and would talk to the folks doing the work and say, hey, yeah, without our clients, without our customers, we don't have a business here. It's the same thing. So finding that middle ground, and back to another point that Anna said in terms of, kind of the access to data, the cleanliness of it, building out our infrastructure to be able to support those decisions in a meaningful way. It gives us a lot of power. It's the old knowledge is power scenario. But what I see oftentimes is, businesses of all sizes, and that's SMB to enterprise, struggle with both data integrity and data governance. So, it's kind of like, hey, you're not alone. But in my opinion, as some smaller businesses, SMB, SME, you are much more positioned to kind of get your hands around that than an enterprise. Things move slow in, larger organizations. That's just the reality of it because there's so many different parts of that puzzle. So I like to spin it around and say, you've actually got a lot more flexibility, a lot more control than you might feel like you do. You might feel like you're really being held, feet to the fire by some of these larger companies, some of these bigger partnerships that you have. But having seen both sides of it, I feel like you are much more well positioned to kind of capture what's happening and to iterate faster than anybody else has the opportunity to do.
Absolutely. 100%
Perfect.
agree with
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thanks, Anna. So we're gonna take a poll right now to get maybe some feedback from the audience to see where cash is most important for your company. So I just launched it. You should see it somewhere in your Zoom. And essentially it asks how our supply chain is critical and the cash matters. So where does your company have the most cash tied up right now? So ignore the first part of the question, right? It's like, what area do you think your company has the most cash tied up right now? And where do you think there's probably less impact. Anna and Dave, can you help me? Do you guys see the poll? Is it active right now? Okay,
It is?
perfect.
Yes.
There's a problem with the poll. They only allow 3 instead of 4 entries. Maybe the 4th one's,
You just have to scroll down. You just have to scroll down to get all of them.
okay, but it won't let me take my 4th or 5th at all. I can only put in the first 3.
Oh, okay. Not sure.
Go for the first 3 then. That's fine.
I mean, I'll try one more time to do all 4. We'll see what happens. Apparently, the problem was I didn't realize originally there was 5. And once I put in information for all 5, it went.
Okay.
Perfect.
No
Good.
problem at my end.
So we have 8 responses so far. We'll wait maybe 1 more minute to close the poll. So far, inventory is winning. No, sorry, labor cost is winning. Inventory second. SG&A cost third. Well, I shouldn't have said that because people are still submitting. So there's a little bias. We'll see. CapEx is a pretty strong second place one. And freight costs and SG&A are also pretty strong second place. Okay. We'll give 10 more seconds. Three, 2, 1. Okay, I took a screenshot of it just in case. Okay, end poll. I'm going to share results. Okay, so are you guys seeing the results right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we found, and this is going to be geared towards the panelists. As you can see, inventory management and inventory just seems to be the largest place where people see that cash is tied up right now, followed by labor costs. So it flipped there at the end. And then third is SG&A, but by quite a margin. So, we've spoken a little bit about inventory already. Randy, maybe want to get your perspective on, from an inventory perspective, what have you seen with your clients? Like, is this something that they're also facing? And how have you sort of seen that they've worked to improve their cash position by, working around their inventory?
You're muted.
Unmuted. Thank you, Anna. So I would say today, even though we specialize in supply chain and procurement mostly, those two worlds have really come together over the last year and a half as interest rates have risen, right? And I think in most cases, most of our clients are trying to figure out how to use the supply chain and procurement function to help change that, right? Traditionally left to plant decision making and maybe decent forecasting, maybe okay demand planning, but it really, procurement can play a big role in that. And so we're starting to re-architect our RFPs, for instance, and the way we're going to market on the procurement side to build in, not only take advantage of annual volume, right, which is where you leverage a spend, but in order to drive that inventory number down, you've got to come up with a way to analyze piece price cost versus inventory turns, right? That and see what those economic trade-offs are, and then make decisions. And a lot of companies today have a gap in that. So one, you got to figure out what your inventory turns objectives are, and then try to build your procurement response to that, and then provide the company information so they can make good decisions. Hey, do I take better piece price on this item, or can I hold my piece price down and still drive the inventory down, or the target order quantity down, that allows me to hit my inventory turns objectives? And And what we've found here in the last few months is you actually can have your cake and eat it too. That'd be my story there is the gap is not as wide as you wanted. So we've tested this in live with customers and clients, and the economics work that to drive to have more impact on inventory than you think. A lot of people get concerned. Yes, if I have to order more to get a lower price, that's just not the case anymore with a properly designed supply chain between direct and distribution.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, I think that highlights, right, the importance that procurement and inventory management have to have a very tight relationship. Sometimes it's a little, up in the air as to like who owns the inventory, right? The inventory levels or right inventory levels. And sometimes it's not even clear in organizations. Like I've seen organizations where you ask, okay, who's responsible for inventory levels? And then sales points to procurement doesn't know, they don't know who really owns it. So maybe Anna, I don't know, in your case, as an inventory lead here, how have you seen the balance between procurement and inventory and other organizations around like who owns it and what's the right relationship to have that makes it a healthy relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you take it from the position that we all own it, that's a way to look at it. We're all responsible, but it's sort of like having, a football team or a baseball team. We're all responsible to win, but we each have a role to play, right? And again, we all need to understand the full objective and who needs to do what. So if we put a proper RACI in place, who actually owns finished goods, right? Is it sales that owns it? Is it supply chain that owns it? Is it finance? We all have a piece of it. Materials, who owns materials? Some say, oh, well, procurement owns materials. Do they really own it? It's like the materials are just an explosion of the finished goods forecast. But so who owns having, inventory levels or inventory targets or looking at the ABC classification of the material spend? Probably procurement should own that piece, right? With the suppliers and help the suppliers to formulate an inventory plan, a min and a max and a target inventory by A, B, and C classifications. We got to look at the demand plan, right? And so production is going to reflect what the demand plan is. But once again, it's having that resilience, across the end-to-end supply chain and having that S&OP, S&OE discussion to talk about this is what's happening with inventory. We need to pull the lever up. We need to take the lever down. We've got some slow moving stuff. Who's going to act on it? So it is that cross-functional team that owns it.
Perfect. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. I'm sorry to interrupt, Randy. But the second piece of the poll that was pretty strong was that cash is tied up in labor. So I wanted to switch it over to you, Dave. And sorry about the dogs. In terms of labor, how can you use different supply chain levers to optimize your labor and maybe unlock some of that cash?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think about that from the kind of productivity standpoint, right? That's kind of the easiest thing to key in on. And again, it depends on the level of maturity you have from both a process and technology standpoint to be able to tap into that. So this is certainly a case of, if we have implemented, let's say, standard cost accounting, and we've got the ability or visibility, I should say, down to the work center level, that gives us a really powerful view in terms of prioritizing where can we focus, where can we free some of that up. It's back to what Anna said earlier from the bottleneck perspective. It's the typical throughput thought process. How do we identify and eliminate that bottleneck? How do we keep that product moving? How do we deploy, resources to make sure that, that we don't have extended lead times across specific work centers, and again, and keep that product moving. the other part of that that I would add to it, and kind of also speaks to the point Anna was making, a lot of the times what I see across organizations are goal setting, S&OP planning, kind of again back to my opening statement. But as we drive all of those things down, right, all the way to the KPI level and how we're holding people ultimately accountable for the things that are happening, those are not always connected. Most cases, they're very disconnected. So we've got, kind of goal sets and standards that we're holding people accountable to. And that ultimately is going to be the driver of all of these other things up the chain that we see, across our P&L. So I think, again, back to what Anna said, kind of more specific about the productivity piece, it's all this same both high level and detailed conversation, and bringing everybody cross functionally together so that as we're looking to identify these, identify and prioritize these activities, that everybody has some input on it, because it's going to be critical ultimately to be able to efficiently
Yeah.
move the needle and drive real results.
Perfect. So, because of time, I want to transition again quickly to maybe some solutions, right? Let's talk about solutions and specific levers that companies can use. So Randy, we'll push it over to you. In terms of your perspective, what tools have you seen companies use that allows them to combat these cash issues effectively? That could be in terms of processes, in terms of technology, in terms of better use of data. What's your experience on how to start tackling some of these problems?
Yeah, so I think the first is, and Dave mentioned the word priority, right? Is companies have to focus on what I like to call the vital few, right? Don't try to do too much, but do something, and get something going. Start getting good at data, right? And don't let perfect be the enemy of good. But you got to get going, and then I think you have to connect people. We can talk process and stuff a lot, but what we see as a misalignment quite a bit is if you can start connecting people and getting them aligned to the same initiative. Like if you have a goal to to increase your inventory turns from 2 to 6 times a year, how are you going to do that? You need, as Anna and Dave said, you need people aligned. So, and I think the missing piece all the time is the incentive solutions that come with people, right? So I think I own inventory, so procurement is not incentive. The only thing that procurement is incented on is cost savings. Well, change the incentive program to get them focused on the vital few, get everybody's incentive plan built around those vital few, and then adapt that as you go. Next year, your vital few might be different, and then adjust your incentive plan to get everybody aligned, everybody's incented on the outcome. And then I'd say the last part is get outcome focused. Start your journey and get something done, and then you energize the team and the company around getting outcomes. So, and then technology, I'd say really quickly, there's great middleware programs now. People get hung up on my data or my systems can't do that. Example, we have customers that are still running AS400 systems, right? That's hard to believe, but it still happens. And so their systems they view as quite limiting, but there are very effective third-party data solutions now that are inexpensive and easy to roll out. And I'm happy to give people names on those, but it's not as expensive as I think people think it is. And so it creates an entry point that they don't think they have. I don't know if that's Diego, I can happily share, but I mean, that's really it. I think align priorities, align people and incentives, and drive to outcomes.
Perfect. Anna, from your perspective, quickly, what solutions would you recommend?
Yeah,
And maybe summarize it like Randy, right? Like people, process, technology, like if you
yeah. So I mean, for me, it's always about people, process, and technology. And there's a reason why people are first, process is second, and technology is third. It starts with the people and what they need. What does the organization need? Designing the processes around that, and then selecting a technology tool to be able to support and execute what people and process needs, right? So it starts with the people. It's old fashioned to say, but really it's about communication and collaboration at the end-to-end supply chain, from customer all the way to supplier, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, and making sure we're chasing that value chain, communicating, collaborating, and taking out the waste. It sounds pretty simple, but it's really hard to do, but it's really about fundamentals in the end.
Perfect. Thanks, Anna. And Dave, given this is such an important question, what are your thoughts, again, organized in those 3 buckets?
Yeah, I mean, I think Randy and Anna did a great job. For me, the thing that everybody misses and how I break down business systems, planning, people, process, technology. And you could certainly add that into the people bucket. But I think that's obviously critical. Those guys, I'm not going to spend any more time there. I put a note in the chat, right? It's simple, but it's not easy. And we've said that multiple times in here. From a tool or technology standpoint, I thought Randy did a nice job highlighting some of the new tools that are out there. Again, I go back to the 2 critical issues from an internal infrastructure piece. That's data integrity and data governance. How do we keep the data clean? How do we clean up the data that's maybe already dirty or compromised? How do we set a rule book around, right, our data? How do we make sure that it is spread across the organization? Those 2 pieces for me are critical. I think the thing I'm most excited about, and I sat through a demo earlier this week. The thing I'm most excited about is some of the advancements from a machine learning and ML and an AI standpoint. There are some really cool things in the works that people are not just building to help with the data integrity and governance issue, but also that, to Randy's point, that kind of middleware layer where we've got now the ability to tap into maybe not the cleanest or most governed data, but still capture really, really meaningful insights to move from, not just data driven, but decision driven. That's really what everybody's after. How do we capture meaningful insights with what we have to drive decisions?
Right.
Perfect. That's a great point as well, Dave. So with that, we've gotten to the 45 minutes of our meeting. Just wanted to call out that if anyone in the audience to collaborate with Anna, Dave, Randy, or myself with supply chain and data analytics, we're happy to help and collaborate in the projects and things you have on hand and are working on. So happy to help with the remaining time. If people have some time to go over, we wanted to do a Q&A. I see the chat is very active. So if someone has any comments that they want to call out, we still have some time to go over. So if you want to unmute yourself and maybe ask a question that you have, we're happy to address it.
I had 2 questions up on the board. I'll ask one, and then maybe if there's another, otherwise I'll do my second one. What I'm seeing in my work life, which has been mostly manufacturing, but also in telecommunications, everything is moving offshore. I can, for example, hire an engineer out of Asia for 1/3 of the cost of American. Anything, I have my own ideas, but any solutions in your mind, how to deal with immense cost pressure because the competition is sourcing everything overseas, which puts you in a bind in terms of your alternative because you got to meet or beat.
Perfect.
The bid proposals that everybody else is doing.
That's a great question. I'll start with that question, Udo. So from my perspective, I've also seen that problem, and that's actually the reason why I started my company. We have engineers and supply chain people based out of Latin America helping. And the philosophy that I've had is sometimes way to out a whole team, for instance, offshore. But it's like you don't need to offshore the whole team in order to get cost savings. You can do one-offs here and there, get some very smart and good talent that can jump as part of your team and hit the ground running, right? So we have Latin America right there in our backyard. How do we take advantage of that from a labor perspective? And then wanted to switch it over to Randy, who's a strategic sourcing expert. Maybe from his perspective, how have you helped companies recently, maybe, fight this cost pressure and inflation that we've seen, especially in the U.S.?
Yeah. So it's a very interesting thing because that does exist, and I think it's only been tempered by some of the geopolitical frictions that we have right now out there in the world. And what it's doing though is it's causing drift back. I mean, shoring and onshoring is probably, it's a very hot topic, right? People are rebalancing their supply chains, and not just back to the United States, but back to Central and South America, to parts of Europe, Eastern Europe, and even Africa. And so the dynamic has shifted quite a bit just in the last few years, the last couple of months in particular. So my answer to that is it's always going to be hard to compete against some offshore sources, depending on what you're trying to do. But I think the trend that we're seeing in most of the help that the companies are asking for is, where should I be sourcing from to protect my supply chain, to build resilience into my supply chain, and to still remain cost competitive. And so a lot of firms are rebalancing that whole thing instead of being China centric, right? So a friend of mine called it best. He calls it a China plus one strategy, right? So I can be in China, but I probably need to be somewhere else too. And so that's really, I don't have a direct answer for cost competitiveness. I mean, it's a real thing that it's not going to go away. But I do think there's a lot of balancing, and that's shifting supply chains around quite a bit. It's influencing packaging markets quite dramatically as to where that's happening. Resin markets, for instance. So that's not a direct answer to the question, but it's I think more perspective.
Yeah, but I'm experiencing all this without even sourcing from China. I can use non-China sources and cut out 2/3 of the cost.
Yeah.
So that's a hell of a challenge,
Yeah, it all depends on what you're sourcing, right? So you do need to do the risk analysis, right? And figure out, where can I source inexpensively that's not going to be critical. It's about understanding the total cost equation as well, right? The total value chain needs to be taken into effect. So if I can hire data analysts out of India, for a fraction of the cost and still get the same, result, that's going to be easy to do. It's a no-brainer to go to India to get my data analysis, as an example, right? But if I'm sourcing, a strategic chemical, resin, as Randy just mentioned, if I need to have clean virgin resin that's going to impact the product, a food grade product, well, I better make sure that I've got the quality built in. I've got, the specs built in. I need to make sure my sustainability, my social impact, my labor costs are coming in accordingly. It's not being done in some child labor farm somewhere in some foreign country that doesn't have the regulations. That I'm not going to source, from a low cost place. It's really about value and low cost, right? And so where is the value going to come from? If it's a strategic item, if it's a strategic supplier, or if it's a strategic skill set, it's going to be a balance of global sourcing, no matter how you try it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And every sort of product or approach has a different decision, and one decision doesn't have to fit all, right? You can categorize using ABCs, right? Like categorizing clients, suppliers, products in ABCs, and then making decisions based on the importance and relevance for your company. So I think that's a great point, Anna. Dave, you wanted to mention something?
Yeah, I mean, and Anna kind of touched on it right there at the end, but for me, it's kind of, we're saying similar things, but differently, right? To me, this is business 101. It's all about the value. It's the value to the customer. It's a value across the supply chain. So at the end of the day, there are going to be certain customers of yours that value certain aspects. And whether you choose to prioritize those customers in an ABC model, whether you choose to prioritize your supply chain from the same thought perspective, this is business basics. You know, we have to figure out a way to provide the value the people that buy our products want. And for some people, that's going to be, you know, offshore. For some people, it's going to be completely onshore. So for me, it's more about prioritizing what's the value that the people we're selling to are seeking, and then how do we balance, you know, that value internally with the cost dynamics that we're all faced with. So
Perfect. Udo, great question. That took us 8 minutes to answer, so that's a sign of a good question. Okay, anyone else from the crowd that has questions? And Heather, I've seen you commenting a lot, so anything you want to bring up? Okay. Heather's shy on the camera, but happy in the chat. Anyone else? Questions, comments? Okay, perfect. So thank you all for your support. Thank you all for joining. Again, you know, we're pretty active on LinkedIn, so you know how to reach through us. You have our contacts there. We might be hosting a few more sessions similar to this, trying to tackle different supply chain problems. So stay tuned, and hopefully we get to know more of you guys in the coming days.
And this event will go out, the recording will go out to everyone that registered. So thank you all. And, you know, happy to connect with anyone that I'm not connected to already on LinkedIn.
likewise, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, I'm going to close.
Okay.